Hello, everyone. This is Sirisha, and I host the Women, Career, and Life podcast. Just like you, I've traversed varied paths, stumbled a little, picked myself up, and learned a great deal on my journey. Many of us face similar questions, but we don't always get to have a conversation with our friends or peers. In this podcast, you will hear real stories that you can connect with on the challenges of navigating career and life. You must be wondering who I am. In my everyday life, I'm a career woman, a mom, and an avid reader. I'm also a road tripper, amateur gardener, and even a fashionista on some days. Join me and my guests as we have an open and honest discussion on career change, trade-offs, and working across boundaries. You get the idea. It's a perspective you simply may not hear anywhere else. I'm really excited to have today's guest, Andrea Martin. She's the podcast host of Career Confessions, and she's also a Latina who talks about her own corporate career, her career pivots, and the business she's growing, along with her coaching career. So let's hear Andrea's story and what advice she has for her clients and some lessons we can all learn from her own experiences. Andrea, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is an amazing topic, and I love talking to strong women like you. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. So let's get started. Give me an idea of how you got to where you're today, what your story is.
So I'm originally from Lima, Peru. I moved to the United States when I was a teenager. The first couple of years, especially in my education, were a lot about advocacy, especially as English being a second language and wanting to take on a bigger career. I knew I wanted to be an engineer as long as I could remember. And that really taught me from earlier on to advocate for what you want, find the resources, make it happen. My family, my mom and I were learning how to apply for college together. So that was a bond that her and I think will always have, Googling what is an SAT. And I've seen my mom worked really hard. My mom and my dad both were really hard to be able to put me through school. So I did my undergrad in chemical engineering. And then I started working internationally as a field engineer for one of the major oil and gas companies in the world. I started working in oil rigs, sleeping in pickup trucks. And I look back, and I have a daughter now. So I look back to some of the places that I've been, and I don't know if I would let her do what I've done, but definitely I've learned a lot. So I started climbing the corporate ladder. I've always worked in male-dominated fields. I love what I did, and it was exactly where I needed to be. I found myself towards the last couple of years leading large organizations, and coaching has always been something that I've done. It's part of who I am. And I decided, you know what, it's time to just do it fully. This is what I love to do. And I transitioned full-time into a coach, which has allowed me to do a couple of things outside of coaching, which is own multiple businesses.
That's a really great story. I have friends who worked on oil rigs. It's a much more stronger male-dominant world than most corporate worlds because you're working multiple days on an oil rigs, offshore. Absolutely. Very often. It's a completely different atmosphere than going to a corporate office and sitting at a desk or in a conference room. And the dynamics, the language, I think all the different, how do I describe it? All the different organizations, all the different skill sets, all the different backgrounds that come together is quite distinctive. So can you give me some examples of how you managed in that environment?
We're talking even 15 years ago when I first started working in oil rigs, which there's probably a lot more accommodations now, or at least I hope that there are a lot more accommodations now that there were 15 years ago. But I vividly remember one of the first things I advocated for was my own porta potty. It was something where I put my foot down and I said, I will not use the same porta potty that 40 other men are using. I need something that is for me. And you have to think about you're wearing a big amounts of PPE, so protective equipment. So while it's easy for a man to walk into a porta potty and not touch every single wall around him, for me, it was a circus, holding everything, trying to make sure nothing touches the sides. And I remember advocating for myself, but that's definitely something that I took with me, which is if you see something that could be better, don't accept anything less. We're here doing the same job. It's only fair that the same resources are provided. I did work 26 days on, 4 days off. That was my first original schedule. And that was definitely a big learning. I vividly remember there were 6 months where I had no days off. And that led me to a pretty big burnout, and to the point where I had to force myself to have vacation. So I had my first case of learning of what happens when you push yourself too far. But overall, and I will tell you, the crews that I worked with were such advocates for me that I'm still friends with them on Facebook. They still message me even 15 years later. And it goes to show, when you show up and no matter what, if you're one day out of college or 15 years out of college, if you show up with servant leadership, people will follow you and they will have your back. And that's what I saw.
Very true. And there's so many allies, so many people to support us. You just need to ask for help and be there for them as well. That shows that camaraderie. You built a very strong relationship to keep that relationship going 15 years later as well. Now you switched to doing a coaching career. You're coaching a lot of clients and you have a lot of businesses. So what is it that most of your clients are looking for? What do you find to be the fairly common themes that they are trying to address that most of us struggle with?
When I first started my business, I started it as something that I was doing just solely on the weekends. I wouldn't necessarily quite call it a side hustle. When I started it, it was something I was really passionate about. The way I saw it is, some people golf on the weekends, especially working in oil and gas. Golfing was a big. Some people hunt on the weekends. If you live in Midwest, that's very popular. I coach, and I felt that was what I did. The reason why I transitioned fully was I realized what I enjoyed a lot about my leadership roles was coaching my teams to be high performers. So I've always been attracted to high performers, those that are aiming for really high goals, that want to break records, that want to maybe go a little bit against the mold of what's happening in the organization, and they want to do it their way. And I've attracted very similar people to that in my practice. Every person that I work with is in some form or fashion trying to go for something that either hasn't been done before or they want to set the bar themselves for the rest of the organization. So a lot of high performers, a lot of people that are already doing really well in their careers. And I think that's a really big distinction. Usually people don't come to me when they're unsure of what's next. They're very sure of what's next. They just want to get there faster.
I understand, because it's very hard for most people to be able to articulate what their goals are, where they want to go. It takes a lot of self-reflection, understanding yourself, understanding the environment. If you're staying in your current place, where those steps you need to navigate. And if you're transitioning to, say, another industry, you're completely pivoting your career, what does that entail and how to go about it? So what are the key pieces of advice you usually give them, and how do you help enable that transition for them?
One of the biggest things that I've noticed, especially with my high performers, is and I'll say we, because this is why I have a coach myself, because I will fall trapped to it as well. We tend to be all or nothing. I'm all in doing it, or I'm failing, and being very careful with what type of limiting beliefs we're putting in place for ourselves and which goals we need to maybe adjust enough so we can remain in a state of high performance. I always talk about, if you're going to go for the Olympic medal, think about reaching the gold medal and standing on the podium and looking at the audience. Who's there? Did you love the journey to get here? And it's not just so much about the gold medal, but it was the journey to become the person you needed to be. So we work a lot in routines, in boundaries, and understanding what works for you, what's noise, and accepting the noise and removing it. So that's one of the biggest things, is not being an all or nothing and allowing some adjustments so you can sustain your goals as you're going towards them. So I would say that's a pretty big one. I would say the second thing is confidence usually is not lacking. However, clarity sometimes around which areas we want to really advocate for are sometimes a little bit more unclear. So for example, I could have a very intelligent top performer, but she or he might not really know which areas they need to focus on in order to elevate their positioning within the company. And it might feel like you're bragging on yourself. It might feel like it's unnecessary political games you have to suffer from. So we get really clear on what is the strategy, what are the things you bring to the table, how are you going to advocate them so it doesn't drain their energy, it actually fuels them so you get there to their goals faster.
Don't forget to subscribe to my Substack newsletter. The links are in the show notes. If you're looking to partner with me for keynote speaking on women leadership, financial independence, or graduate school and beyond, check out my website and reach out to me. Stay tuned in and listen to the rest of the podcast. Thanks for listening.
I like both of those points because the first one is the journey. I attended a Tony Robbins workshop and there was him and there was many speakers and that's what they said. Often they ask, what is the feeling you get when you reach your goal? How do you feel? And it's very hard to describe it as joy and happiness all the time because when we reach it, very often people just check the box and are moving on to the next thing. You do not take the time to just enjoy it, pat yourself on the back. But even those steps to get, that is the part. It's the journey. And there was a lot of discussion also about failing and feeling successful and a lot of quotes from high-achieving people about that. And that is what keeps us going. If it was simple or easy, the self-satisfaction is challenging to feel. Not that it has to be hard because there are so many things you learn along the way. They'll be developing new relationships as they navigate the space that you're talking about. When I just look at my own career and others, where you want to get, organizations, especially corporations, are very huge. There's so many avenues, so many places to go. And sometimes you can narrowly focus on one spot you want to go to and being able to define that large scope of, hey, I could completely pivot and take this to this completely different area. And maybe that's what will make me happy or will provide the most value to the company. And both those things will work together is very hard to do. And I am really glad to see that you provide that clarity and help them drive the discussion to see where they want to go and be able to articulate that clearly.
You said that beautifully. And I would even add the amount of times that I have failed in order to get to a quarter of the goal that I've wanted to get to. I don't know if this is maybe appropriate or falls in line with this, but I was telling a client of mine yesterday who's building a business on top of her career. And I was telling her, this isn't an easy journey. If it was easy, then everybody would do it. And if it was, and I always said that even when we were doing maybe an initiative at work or we're changing the way we do something, if it was easy, we would have already done it. It is the truth. If it was easy, it would have been done. And sharing some of the difficult parts of the journey and being comfortable with falling flat on our face, knowing that we're going to get back up and keep going sounds cliche, but if you're not ready to scrape your knees a little bit, then you're just walking. And what's the fun in that? While it might feel safe, you're also not going to feel the sense of, wow, I'm really progressing towards my goal. So being comfortable with scraping your knees along the way as you fall a couple of times, it's also okay.
I like that visual. It reminds me of being a kid. There's no fear.
Yes.
I think that's the thing. It's the lack of fear and you're just running. You're not thinking so much and retrospecting. That's where we all sometimes tend to get stuck on. And you also said there's the all or nothing. Even as I'm doing the podcast, it's the question, is it all or nothing? But it's actually a nuanced approach because there's so many things I have to think of. And when you talk about your own life, you are running your business, you have coaching, you're a mom. So how do you balance all these pieces between being the all or nothing that you're looking at?
I've really learned I have to give myself grace. If I really want to go after everything, and I have some pretty big goals for myself, just as much as I push my clients to dream bigger, I lead that with my own life. And I am not going to get to my goals and leave the legacy that I want if I'm picking myself apart in the process. And that's how I had to really create a vision for, like, actually visually picture it of every time that I told myself that wasn't good enough, or you could have done that playtime better, is like chipping away my body and what is going to be remaining by the end of the day. What I've learned is my kids want a happy mom. That's really what they want. They don't want to see me miserable. So everything that I do needs to be with that goal in mind. So self-care is actually part of how I show up as a happy mom. So when we do have time together, it's very intentional. And I always say, think about, we wear so many titles as women and really as professionals. I say men as well, because there's a lot of really present parents that are battling many titles. And if we wear many hats, we're not really going to be wearing all the hats at once. That would be silly if it was actual, you're walking outside in the street with 3 hats on. People would look at you a little funny. So why are we trying to do that with our lives? So wear one hat at a time. Try to do it to the best of your ability. If you didn't like how that came out, then what was the noise? Let's remove that. But I have created pretty strong boundaries for myself. And it's been a really big journey for me, I'll tell you. If I shared my boundaries that I have now with me of 2 years ago, she would be like, you're crazy. There's no way she's doing that. Because I've had to really learn to let go. Things will get done. They don't have to get done this very second. They will get done. And I've actually been way more successful. So the evidence, as the engineer in me is saying, hey, the evidence is there that this is more strategic. So now is no longer, I should have boundaries, is, oh, boundaries actually help me be more efficient. Therefore, there's more of a logic side to it, which maybe not for everyone, but for me, logic, it makes it feel like I'm doing things on purpose, and that has helped me. So very clear with when I work, when I don't, when I answer messages from my clients. And up until 3 months ago, I completely rebranded the way that I was working with my clients. I had pretty high touch, really large group with a lot of touch points, and I've rebranded it to be fewer, equal amount of touch points, but much more manageable.
I like that, especially there's a ton of conversation around mental health. And just when you're talking about self-care, having the boundaries, giving yourself some grace, I think they all lead to that path. Whether you're going through the challenging situation or not, to create it because you're overstressing. We all tend to push ourselves really hard. It's maybe confidence eroding, but maybe it's not just that. It's just so much self-pressure, completely unnecessary to do that, though we have the urge to do it. And I'm glad you're setting boundaries, because I think for those who are listening, even at work, I know we all, whether you're running your own business, whether you're running a different organization, whether you're working in the corporate world, it is good to set some boundaries and work. And most people are pretty open to having that conversation. I think sometimes we hold ourselves back, limit, and think, oh, I shouldn't ask that. But you don't really lose anything by asking. You'll be surprised by some of the answers you get. And some of those other people may be having the same situation, and they might be wanting to broach the same subject. So I think if one person opens the door, it gives everyone the opportunity to come to the table and have that conversation, and how they might be going through. Because we spend 40 hours, 60 hours, maybe working on our careers, be it, through a organization, freelance, whatever you're doing. You spend as much time or sometimes less time at home. So there has to be some intersection points where those intersect, and some boundaries that are there so that you can take pieces of yourself back and forth, and for people to get to know you a little better.
100%.
And how has that reaction been from your clients as you're doing this? What has their response been?
I'll add one thing, which is it really helped me, which self-care is not necessarily thinking me first, but me too. Making yourself part of the priority. It doesn't have to be before everything else. You can make it do or if it feels well. And for me, sometimes self-care can be, I need 1 hour by myself in my room, and I'm going to grab an episode of like House season 1 and go watch that while I drink my coffee in peace. And that could be self-care for the day, and that feels really good. But to the following question, my clients, I have a lot of love for my clients. And actually the decision, and I'll share this, is the decision that I made 3 months ago was a really difficult one, because I loved my clients and I was so invested in their journeys. Most of my clients have been with me for over 2 years. So whenever I made the decision of closing down one of my programs, it was a decision that had probably been brewing for 6 months, but I wasn't able to execute because of the people. However, their responses were exactly what I needed to hear. Essentially what they said was, we knew this day was coming. We knew that you have a lot of things going on, and we knew that it was time to evolve, and we see this for you. You've shared this, and all of them are still extremely connected with me on Instagram. And I will tell you, that was actually probably the biggest reason why I held on going full time in my coaching business, was because I also loved my team that I was leading in the organization. So I have always been so much more attached to the people than anything else. And I don't think I would have it any other way. I think that's who I am. I embrace that. As long as I have to also know when to make decisions and take the step forward, so I can also think bigger and I could serve even more people. So I have ideas of how to serve them without necessarily spreading myself into unlimited number of hours.
I love that. I think, and what your clients reacted and your customers, I guess in some ways, partly your friends, is not surprising. They already knew what you're going through. They were waiting for you to pull the trigger and just say, okay, I'm ready to take this next step. And probably that was the back of their minds. And it just helped them also probably transition and say, okay, this is what I will do next. So when you're looking at high coach clients, like you said, highly driven, up in their careers, do you have advice for early or mid-career individuals who are looking for how to find their voice, how to define what those first few steps are as they transition into a new organization or they're starting their career?
The biggest thing is you don't need anybody's permission to start making an imprint wherever you are. And especially as you leave college, in college, you know what you're doing, what you're expected. They give you a syllabus at the beginning of the semester. They tell you exactly what you need to get what grade. They're giving you essentially the blueprint for how are you successful here. No one's giving you that blueprint when you go into your first job. No one's telling you have this many conversations with senior leaders. Go have this. Go talk in this meeting. And I would say make your presence known. And it doesn't have to be I'm always speaking, but how do you add value? How do you close loops? Ask the questions that you have. Be a presence. I always encourage, whether you're early, mid, or even senior, I work with a lot of VPs. Just because sometimes it's the opposite. They have such a high title, they're afraid to actually interject because they don't want to seem that their question becomes a task for someone else. So they're balancing even the opposite of like, my voice is worth so much, I have to be careful of how I use it. But at the end of the day, that's what we have. It's your voice. Don't be afraid to use it and learn earlier on. What do you want to be known for? And the reason why I say that is that will change. What you want to be known for will change, but start with draft number 1. Perhaps you left college and you realized that you were a very natural collaborator, that no one understood how you got one lab to open for you, but you spoke with the janitor and the janitor helped you and somehow you guys finished your homework at the end. Okay, well, you know what? That's a skill. How are you going to bring that into your corporate job? And you will reinvent yourself, but especially with the all or nothing, you're not going to create a personal brand early in your professional that will be exactly the same later on. But if you start, you'll be able to be chipping away to understand how do you want to show up, and then you can go full force. So don't be afraid to start establishing your personal.
Such a key point. There's personal brand and there's reputation, and people sometimes get the two mixed together. Reputation is what people might think, but personal brand, like you said, is very intentional. It's a choice you're making, what you want to see yourself as, what you want others to think of you when they think of the opportunities or when they think of your voice that is being heard. And I like that you interjected because that is a constant progression. It is not that is something that's stuck in stone. But the other reason I want to bring it back is for those who are returning to work. I took 2 career breaks when I came back, and I remember one of our other guests saying, sometimes you're frozen in time. So if you're working with someone who you worked with 10 years ago that intersects with you, that personal brand, that voice they heard is different from what your voice is today, which is actually probably a really good thing because they might bring back and interject different aspects that you may have forgotten along the way. And when someone's looking for that next opportunity, all these different threads can come together and weave a nice pattern. And you see a whole new picture. And now when you go to that next thing, like you're saying, being the janitor, helping how you collaborated in the lab or something else you did, there are so many pieces of your story that you bring together and those skills to drive that forward. And
absolutely.
And it's interesting when you talk about senior leaders also struggling with the same thing. I think when you're new, a novice to a place, you're wondering how to ask the question. Like when you're in school, you don't want to be the first one to raise your hand, but then you might realize that there are others who have the same question but haven't asked it. And I guess sometimes the senior leaders can struggle with the same thing, right? It could be a question they don't want to ask, or like you said, a task they don't want to unintentionally create. So it's a very nuanced approach to be able to bring everyone to still express their opinion, and for you to have that voice and that space, even safe space for the senior leader to express their opinion, but not become a place to be judged and made decisions on. And then you can provide some clarity around that and say, okay, this is what we discussed. I know I expressed this, but let me put a caveat. You don't have to actually do what I'm asking. I just want us to discuss so we have a more sensible decision than only one perspective to be heard, because that's what diversity of thought is. You want all of these things, then to articulate and work through the process. So that's really good.
Yeah, that's spot on. And I always say, what if your question saved millions of dollars? Are you willing, if it was your money, would you ask it? And usually my clients go, even my early professionals are like, no, I would ask that question. I was like, okay, then that could be the outcome here. And I would even say to the early professionals, you have such a huge advantage that you are coming out of college with information that perhaps senior leaders have not even been exposed to. So don't think that you don't have anything to add or value to add. You can absolutely be a resource for skip levels or even above. And people don't reach out to them. They think, what are the odds that they'll respond? Okay, the odds are actually probably really high. And then you have an opportunity to talk to them. And you can always come prepared with a couple of talking points just in case so your nerves are subsided. Go grab a Harvard Business Review article, have it in your back pocket. If there's silence, bring it up, talk about how you just read this article and add some value to the conversation. It really doesn't have to be complicated.
Very true. What I've realized when I've talked to some senior leaders is they actually have mentees that are, or mentors who are new college grads, because when you look at the landscape, talk about social media, sustainability, you're talking about AI, machine learning, those are all fairly new concepts to the corporate world. And if companies have been there for a long time, there's a whole value add you bring just from your perspective, from the social impact conversation that people have to be aware of. So there is a whole dynamic that you can change in this conversation for them to look at. And you're absolutely right. If you send it to senior leaders, I think the way to do it is if you send a calendar invite or something, you will get a response. Most of them are willing to spend time. Of course, you provide value when you have that conversation and you suggested some great ways for them to engage. And that could lead into a long-term collaboration.
Absolutely. And I might add another tip if that's helpful, especially if you have an internal portal and there's a leader of another group, go find out what's the latest win of that group and say, hey, I noticed that your organization was just recognized internally for XYZ. What a great achievement. I would love to sit down and talk about the journey that it took to get here. Or, hey, I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, you shared these 2 articles I found to be insightful. Would you ever be open to discussing that more in a 20-minute coffee chat? You stand out immediately if you do something like that.
Very true. And it helps you first and also to connect with them. Like you said, 15, 20 minutes is a good way, like a time frame for someone to give you time. They don't feel like it's incredibly long. So it's a good sweet spot to start that conversation. And then I've heard and seen so many relationships change because of that, because the value you provide, everyone's experience is unique. Even if you're coming out of college, it's not just your college experience, it's all your prior experiences, the connections you've made. You bring so many different perspectives, so it helps. And maybe they'll end up being your mentor in the future that you'd never even thought to ask. So, or your sponsors or your advocates. So there's so much to learn from that experience. I see on your Instagram posts and stuff, you talk about goal setting and career advice and money mindset. Can you spend some time talking about what are those themes that you find to be helpful to the people who are looking at career progression outside your coaching business, and what that conversation when they self-reflect to look at their career?
The biggest thing is, I always talk about, it would be like driving a car. While you can have a great car, which is your diploma, your career, where are you going to take that car? At what speed? What direction? Or which route do you want to take? And reinventing yourself along the way is absolutely okay, but be aiming for something at first. If you ever feel like you need to have the perfect career plan, just go and look. If you have an iPhone, go and look at what version of the iPhone you have on, and then go and remember with the journey that it took to create a device like you have today. And what if they had waited for the iPhone to be what it's today to release it? One, we wouldn't have created it because we wouldn't have realized the bugs, the fixes, the ideas along the way, the innovation, and that will happen with your career as well. So I am not a huge fan of always being, what do you want to do in 10 years? Who knows? That might change, but what is your next goal? Do I want that? Is that the direction I want to go? And if it's enticing, start chipping away a goal in mind to make that happen. That could be, I want to specifically understand how I need to show up. And again, elevating yourself to the next version. So goal setting, career planning really go hand in hand. I'm happy to discuss those 2 topics all the time because honestly, if you're not aiming for something, you're in limbo. And I don't want you to be in limbo. I don't want you to be on cruise control unless you want to be. And you might get to a destination and decide, I want to get back in the car and go somewhere else. And that's perfectly fine. But at least you learned something that you wouldn't have had you just been going with whatever you thought you should be doing.
And nowadays, there is no specific career path, right? The people are they call them the career lattices. So you're constantly moving within your own companies or other corporations and trying to find that right space. And when you're talking about figuring out where they want to go, there's a lot of ways you can do it. You can do information interviews, just like you talked about talking to senior leaders for 20 minutes, that you can go across, say you want to stay in your same company, you can go talk, you're in the engineering organization, you can talk to marketing, you can talk to the systems people, you can talk to sales, you can talk to all these other organizations you would probably not ever think of, and get and find out what they're working on and see if that's something that you enjoy. And like you said, go take the car, drive to that spot, try the job. Maybe you really love it and you want to stay there and grow in that space, or you want to take it back to your original destination and find a different route. There are so many experiences. The thing is, nothing ever goes to waste. Learning is a journey. You'll either learn something that you liked it or that you didn't like it. That's learning in itself. Not knowing what you don't want to do is itself a big step up. And then you can take those experiences and bring them back. And there might be an opportunity in the future where someone will really want those 3-4 pieces together and not find someone with that experience to stitch it. So it's good to have those sort of jumps back and forth as you do this.
And I will add, one of the biggest distractions in career planning is usually not what you should do next, but comparing to other people that you think have it all figured out. And you're driving at the speed that you think you should be, and then you see that Corvette speed past. You're like, why can't I be a Corvette that's going, and you don't even know that car's going in circles. You didn't even know, but you saw it go fast, and you're like, I want to go as fast as that person. They might have a different plan. They might have a different life. They might have different goals, different missions. Comparison can be such a thief of joy. And I always look back. I know that you graduated with someone. I always say there's always that one person you graduated with that perhaps you even gave them homework that they didn't have, and you helped them finish. And then all of a sudden they got a better job than you outside of college. And you're like, how did this happen? You never know what 10 years from now will look like for either of you. So instead of wasting your energy thinking about that, focus on yourself, focus on your growth, and truthfully, you cannot go wrong. But it takes a lot to let that go. It's probably one of the hardest things. And even with peers that you're comparing yourself to, ask yourself why you're comparing and get a couple levels deeper, because there's something to learn about that comparison.
It is very hard to do. Very easy to say. I totally understand what you're saying. I suppose you do it naturally. All of us struggle with that. But it's interesting because that Corvette will speed. But then if I look at the last 10, 15 years of what I worked on, sometimes people are stepping ahead, some people are parallel. They must be wondering why you're stepping ahead, and then they jump 3 steps. So you never know in this dance or this car journey that you're going where anyone ends up. And where they end up is maybe someplace you do not want to be, or maybe you do want it, and well, then what do you want to do to get there? And it's a human emotion. We all struggle with it, but it's putting it in perspective. Like my dad says this. He said, when you're standing in a line, we're always looking at the people in front of us and saying, oh, why are they ahead? But really turn back and look and see at all the people behind you, not to see that you're in front of them, but to see how far along you've come. That's what I guess teaches you when you talk to people. If you're looking for building that board of finding people to talk to, when you look at people who have experiences who are maybe 10, 20 years senior to you, it gives you a feeling of where to go, like aspiration, and also talking to people who might be early in the career to see how far you have come along. And goes back to your iPhone example. Everything needs a certain evolution. There needs to be some learning that we go through to find where that path is. I've had friends who have aspired to a certain role, and this is not one person, many people who wanted a certain job. They tried for it, they got it, and 6 months later realized that wasn't what they wanted at all, and they went back and switched out. It's also hard to switch out of your career choice, especially when you're so invested and you wanted it so desperately and you took the job, and then you realize that's not what you wanted. It's quite hard to give it up and say, okay, I'm going to let it go and I'm going to cut the thread, and not easy to do at all.
It's not easy. And I would even add that I had a grieving period after I left my job where I had to be careful of what I was feeling. Because really, it's like a relationship ending. It's very similar. So you go through and then you're thinking about all the late nights that you had great conversations and you're like, oh, that wasn't that bad of a friendship or that bad of a relationship, or, oh, maybe I should have stayed. But really, when you're growing, there will be growing pains and there will be grieving moments where you're essentially a snake shedding your skin. And as much as perhaps you're attached to that skin, it's time to let it go as well. And one thing I would add to the comparison piece is, if you feel like you're asking why them and not me, I would love the reframe, and I would encourage the reframe of, okay, they skipped 3 levels. Okay, so it is possible. So evidence is there that it's possible for me as well. I just need to maybe reshape my plan, but it's possible. So it's not necessarily why them, not me, but now it's thank you for doing it, because now I know there's nothing holding me back.
Exactly. And then maybe it's a good time to go back and look at your personal brand and everything and see what is it that you have left as a brand that you have left, and see if that's what you want to continue, or maybe time to change it and revise it and see what that looks like. Yeah.
Absolutely. Love it.
Some really great conversations. So as we are wrapping up, one thing I ask all my guests is, what advice would they give their 21-year-old self?
I would tell her, no matter what, you will figure it out. There are some big learnings coming your way, and this is forever. There will be major learnings coming your way, but you've survived every single bad day you've had so far, and you will continue to do so. Lean into your intuition. Know that you will figure it out. You might not have the answer right away, but you will figure it out. So don't feel stuck, because there's an option there. You just have to dig a little deeper. Maybe get in the closet, go look it back. Maybe you'll be surprised with what you find out. The reason why I bring that up is, I think at times the things that throw us off have really nothing to do with maybe the bigger goals. It could be smaller things we thought would go smoothly. And because they don't, it can be a bigger roadblock that we realize, but you will figure it out.
Very good advice. And what is the one word you would use to describe yourself?
I would say grit has been my theme for as long as I can remember.
Very good. And I think that's helped you pivot, make transitions, and basically fight for your space and make sure you're moving forward. So that's really good.
I appreciate it. That's definitely been the theme. If I don't feel like there's that uncomfort zone or outside my comfort zone and look growing pains, I don't feel fully satisfied.
Thank you, Andrea. This was a great conversation. We touched on so many different things and nuggets for people to unpack and see how they can drive their career wherever their stages are, and what they can provide and value add to anybody in an organization or for their own growth as well. So I really appreciate you sharing your advice. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Tune in every other Wednesday to catch the next episode. If you think a friend may benefit from this, please share this podcast with them. All the resources we talked about are also available on my website, womencareerandlife.com. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. I would love to hear from you about your stories and your journey. You can reach me on my blog, Twitter, Instagram, or Gmail at Women, Career and Life. Until next time, this is Sirisha signing off. Remember, there are infinite possibilities to drive change in career and life. Which will you choose to make a reality today?